Hi, yes,
Yeah, I can.
okay.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the court's first virtual swearing-in ceremonies of 2024. Please keep your audio muted throughout the ceremony. If you wish to follow the speaker, you may want to set your view to speaker view. Mr. Julio Castillo, Clerk of the Court of Appeals, will offer opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Date.
Again, good afternoon and welcome to the first swearing-in ceremony of 2024. Just a few things to repeat what Mr. Date said. Please turn your electronic devices off. Also, I will be administering the oath, and when I administer the oath, I will use the word swear. If any of you object to the use of the word swear, you can substitute the word affirm in its place. And again, welcome, and I turn the mic over now to Mr. Day.
Thank you, Mr. Castillo. The courtroom clerk will now open the courtroom.
All persons having business before the Honorable Associate Judge now presiding over the District of Columbia Court of Appeals, draw near and give your attention. God save the United States in this honorable court. This honorable court is now in session. Please come to order.
Thank you. The Honorable Judge Ruiz will offer introductory remarks.
Good afternoon. I am Vanessa Ruiz, a senior judge of the District of Columbia Court of Appeals. And on behalf of our Chief Judge, Anna Blackburn Rigsby, and my colleagues on the court, I am pleased to welcome you, the prospective new members of the District of Columbia Bar, as well as your friends and families who might be watching. Generally, when we hear cases in court, it is a serious and sobering affair. So it is a real pleasure to preside over a joyful occasion like this, a swearing-in ceremony. And I can inform you that by the time we finish here today, you will all have prevailed before our court. First, I want to say just a few words about our court. The DC Court of Appeals is a relatively new court. It was created by Congress in 1970 as the highest court of the District of Columbia, equivalent to the highest court of a state. This court's rulings are reviewable only by the Supreme Court of the United States. Our jurisdiction includes review of appeals from all divisions of the district's trial court, the Superior Court of the District of Columbia, as well as appeals from the DC administrative agencies. The court created the District of Columbia Bar. It is our duty to oversee its members, including to rule on motions for admission of new members. Today, that motion will be made on your behalf by a member of our staff, Ms. Ilea Welch.
Good afternoon. Motion for admission. On behalf of the Committee on Admissions for the District of Columbia Court of Appeals, I, Ilea Welch, staff attorney for the District of Columbia Court of Appeals, Committee on Admission, move to the admission to the bar of this court, the applicants whose names appear in the attached list and who have satisfied the requirements for admission to this bar, to the bar of this court. On behalf of the Committee on Admissions, I certify that to the court that these applicants possess the necessary qualifications for admission to the bar. Thank you, Judge Ruiz.
Thank you, Ms. Welch. Would you kindly give the motion to the clerk of the court, to Mr. Castillo?
Thank you. Here you are, Judge Ruiz.
Thank you, Mr. Castillo.
You're welcome.
While it may appear that I am giving the motion that Mr. Castillo has electronically sent to me right now, only a cursory review, I know that the Committee on Admissions has devoted a great deal of time to your applications and would not have placed your name on the list if anything were out of order. So I am pleased on behalf of the court to grant the motion for your admission. So Mr. Castillo, will you kindly administer the oath to the new admittees?
Yes, Judge Ruiz, thank you. Please stand and raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name. Do solemnly swear that as a member of the bar of this court, I will demean myself uprightly and according to law, and that I will support the Constitution of the United States of America. I turn the mic over now, and
Thank
Thank
you, Mr. Castillo.
Mhm.
The Honorable Judge Ruiz will give judicial remarks.
Thank you. It is a tradition at these swearing-in ceremonies for the presiding judge to make brief remarks, and I'm following that tradition today with you. So now that you have been sworn in, on behalf of the Court of Appeals, I extend congratulations to you and a warm welcome to practice in the District of Columbia courts. You are all our new fellow members of the DC Bar. Judges are members of the DC Bar as well. I want to congratulate also those of you who are watching and accompanying you at this moment. We welcome you also to this historic courthouse. As we are doing this virtually, I want to paint a bit of a picture for you as if you were here. If you were to look around, you would see that there are quite a few of you as part of this ceremony. I would say today, right now, about 150. There was an earlier bar admission ceremony today. The building itself is quite grand and beautiful. And if you haven't been to it, I invite you to come, not just to look at it, but to actually come into the courtroom and practice before a court, or just to come into the courtroom and hear oral argument. All of our oral arguments are open to the public. They're also live streamed on YouTube. The DC Court of Appeals courthouse, referred to as the historic courthouse, is one of the oldest public buildings in DC, originally commissioned as Washington City Hall in 1820. The architect was George Hadfield. From then to the present day, the building has played many roles, some disparate, some surprising. There's been a federal and district courthouse as the judiciary evolved, including the U.S. Circuit Court, the U.S. District Court, the Supreme Court of the District of Columbia, the U.S. Court of Appeals, and the D.C. Court of General Sessions. And most recently, since an extensive renovation, it has become the home of the D.C. Court of Appeal. It functioned as a hospital and held prisoners of war during the Civil War. It has housed several notable residents and events. District Attorney Francis Scott Key, who wrote our national anthem, had an office under this roof. Frederick Douglass's office as U.S. Marshal for DC was in our building. Theodore Roosevelt's office as head of the Civil Service Commission was in this building. More recently, the building has housed offices for the Public Defender Service and the DC Attorney General. As I said earlier, the building was renovated and rededicated exclusively for the use of the District of Columbia Court of Appeals in 2009. As a courthouse, it has been the setting of several significant trials. In 1849, the prosecution of Daniel Drayton, an abolitionist and orchestrator of the largest recorded escape attempt by slaves, enslaved people, aboard the schooner the Pearl. In 1867, John Surratt was tried for conspiracy to assassinate President Lincoln, whose statue was erected, and President Lincoln's statue still stands today, facing Indiana Avenue. In 1925, there was a trial involving the Teapot Dome scandal, as you know, one of the biggest bribery scandals in the US. And now today, the building, this courthouse, is the setting for your admission to the bar of the District of Columbia. And we welcome you to our court and to practice here. Taking the oath and listening to its words, not only in your head, but also internalizing it in your heart, is a good reminder of what it means to be admitted to the practice of law. Let me tell you something about the bar of which you are now a part. Notwithstanding its small geographic size, the District of Columbia has one of the largest bars in absolute numbers in the US, over 100,000. It is certainly the largest on a per capita basis. It is a very diverse bar, both in terms of its membership and the areas of practice in which its members engage. The court, with the assistance of several committees and disciplinary counsel, has the authority and the responsibility to pass on the admission and the professional conduct of all lawyers in the District of Columbia. We admit lawyers who qualify, such as this distinguished group. But we also, unfortunately, sometimes have to suspend and disbar lawyers who do not live up to the ethical standards of the rules of professional responsibility. It's always a sad, though necessary measure to protect the public and clients. From this vantage point, I can tell you that the practice of law in this city is probably one of the most varied and exciting in the country. Some of you who are being admitted today will practice in law firms, from small to large, international firms, or in government, whether local or federal, or in trade associations or consulting firms, or with public interest groups, or in private business. Some of you will be litigators, others transactional attorneys, others will engage in analysis and policy work, others in the legislative arena. Some of you will find your practice and continue with it for a long time. But others among you, because developing interests or because of changes in the legal market, will shift your legal practice perhaps a few times. I hope that all of you will take advantage of the size and diversity of our bar and the variety of opportunities in the District of Columbia for legal work and also for service to our community. You come to practice in the District of Columbia, the nation's capital, at a time that questions government and its institutions. This includes the court, the courts, and the judicial system. The careful and fair application of law by courts and the integrity of lawyers who practice before them are therefore critical. Remember the oath you took today and the responsibility it imposes on each one of you as a member of our bar to help instill public confidence in the judicial system by your actions in each case that you handle, in every paper you file, and every court appearance that you make, and whenever you give advice to a client. Remember also that you're being admitted to practice in the District of Columbia, a vibrant community. Real people live and work here. And real people, as we know, have real needs and problems, including the need for legal services, for tutoring, and for mentoring. In this connection, I want to remind you of Rule 6.1 of the Rules of Professional Responsibility, by which your conduct as a member of the DC Bar must always be guided. I'm only going to quote the first sentence of the rule. It says, a lawyer should participate in serving those persons or groups of persons who are unable to pay all or a portion of reasonable attorney's fees or who are otherwise unable to obtain counsel. A resolution adopted by the DC Court's Judicial Conference, as well as by the Judicial Conference of the DC Circuit Court of Appeals, specifies what this professional obligation entails. Each lawyer should accept one court appointment or devote at least 50 hours of pro bono legal service each year to an indigent or disadvantaged client. Or if that is not feasible, to make a financial contribution of about $750 or 1% of earned income to organizations that provide pro bono services. I suggest that you do both. The need is great. Many persons with pressing legal needs go without any legal representation. A shockingly high percentage have no choice but to represent themselves in landlord and tenant court and in cases of domestic violence. This in a community which, as I mentioned earlier, has the highest number of lawyers on a per capita basis in the country. Many of those needs are in areas within your practice, and they will be familiar to you. But you could decide to take on a case in a new area If you do, there are programs that will teach you what you need to know so your pro bono work will be on a par with your billed work, as it should be. Those of you who have language skills are sorely needed. I have been addressing new members of our bar for almost 30 years. And I invariably talk about pro bono service because the need is so great. I would like to mention several items from a report of the DC Access to Justice Commission, which was created by this court to bring together judges, members of the bar, legal service providers, academics, and community representatives to tackle the lack of legal representation and other obstacles that hinder access to court and other resources designed to protect important rights to shelter, to education, to physical safety, to health, and to family. We live in such a thriving city of professional and high-powered individuals that we tend to forget that not all of our neighbors are participating in that life. As the report entitled Delivering Justice reminds us, over 100,000 DC residents live in poverty and are more likely to experience civil legal problems. Poverty itself impedes their ability to address and recover from those problems. The challenges of poverty are compounded by life circumstances that create additional barriers for thousands. Over 70,000 district residents are 65 years or older. Nearly 41,000 are limited English proficient. Tens of thousands live with a disability. 15% are immigrants who may be in a vulnerable status. They feel very exposed. The report finds that even though our legal service providers have doubled the number of staff and the number of clients they serve through full representation during the 10 years since the Commission's previous report, the mounting legal needs of DC residents continue to outpace the resources they have available to meet those needs. Most striking is the data received from the DC courts, especially the Superior Court, and the DC Office of Administrative Hearings, showing rates of lack of representation. Just some examples. While some percentages have lowered since our report in 2008, when I say our, I mean the DC Access to Justice Commission, of which I'm a member, they are still staggeringly high. 97% in small estate probate matters go without legal representation. Around 85 to 90% in family matters. An estimated 88% of tenants in eviction cases. 88% of petitioners in domestic violence cases. And respondents in those cases, even more, 95%. Even on appeals, where the rules that govern presentation of cases are less apparent to a layperson. In some types of matters, 50 to 90% of parties are going it alone when their housing is at stake or in family and probate matters. This need is also evidenced by the thousands of litigants who visit the court's self-help centers each year seeking help. And these are the people who make it to the court. Imagine how many others don't know their rights or simply give up. The numbers that I have cited you for the District of Columbia, I know a number of you will not necessarily be actively practicing or living in DC, but these numbers are not unusual. They are a reflection of what happens or what is happening throughout the country. So wherever you're from, the unmet need for legal representation is sobering. So that is the bad news. There's also good news, and you are it. Lawyers of the DC Bar have a long tradition of providing pro bono legal services to the economically disadvantaged. As a result, there are many programs for pro bono service available through the DC Bar, through voluntary bar associations and law firms. They run the gamut from helping one person navigate a claim for disability compensation to representing an abused or neglected child to assisting an immigrant seeking asylum from persecution in another country. You might be helping a person sort through what appears to the layperson to be an incomprehensible and devastating problem. You could help with your legal knowledge what are many times fairly minor knots that can nonetheless tie up a person's life. Or you could be writing an appellate brief for a person on death row. Another way to fulfill this ethical responsibility, and I would add a moral one, is through service to the courts directly by volunteering to take over representation of pro se litigants in civil litigation. Cases handled represent the broad spectrum of civil litigation in the district at the trial and appellate levels, and include prisoner cases, workplace and domestic disputes, and administrative cases, among others. I urge you to consider how you can help represent a person in need. You can obtain information from the DCCA's Pro Bono Committee, which will have a representative at the court for new admittees, which I'm sure you will be taking, from local legal service providers and through local bar associations. If you end up practicing in another jurisdiction, see what you can do there because they need you. But in your practice, carry on this bar's outstanding tradition of service. When you do, you will come to realize that you are gaining as much for yourself, if not more, than you are giving. Many of us, and I include myself and other judges, look back over our professional careers and what we have accomplished and ponder whether the many sacrifices were worth it. Often we find that the most satisfying work professionally and personally were the efforts we made in cases we handled on a pro bono basis. It reminds us all that notwithstanding caricatures of lawyers, all those lawyer jokes, law can indeed be a noble profession that furthers values of fairness and justice that we hold dear. These are the values that probably motivated you. I know they motivated me to study law in the first place. And speaking of what is important, as you go forward, have a life outside of your law practice, a rich personal life with your friends and your family. Spend time with them. They have supported you and helped you during your law student studies. They will hear you complain often enough about the long hours at work and about the difficulties of the job market. So have a life and appreciate what you have. Being a lawyer is a terrific thing, but it is not the only thing. On behalf of the District of Columbia Court of Appeals, welcome and best wishes in your practice here. Thank you.
This honorable court is now adjourned.